Hi, my name's Eli, and I'm really excited to get to talk to you today about why I think prototyping is really fun and a fundamental part of design as a part of business and product development. So, I first met Sarah over a LinkedIn connection, which I always love connecting with people from the design community. And she told me about your fabulous community coming together to learn about design thinking, make things, be creative together, and be creative in a community. I'm based in Austin, Texas, so I can't join you guys for your sessions because they're usually quite late for me in the evening. But I'm excited to be here with you today virtually and asynchronously to give this presentation. So without further ado, I'd love to just get started and talk to you about why I think prototyping is really fun. So the fundamental question to ask yourself is, what does the term prototype mean to you? And there's multiple different interpretations of it. And just take a moment to consider to yourself, what is a prototype? And not just in the sense of business or the Merriam-Webster kind of definition of prototype, but when you think of prototype, what do you think? Sometimes I think of future, I think of futurism and testing. Sometimes very scientific terms come to mind. But what I'm here today to tell you is that prototyping is just simply the act of making a concept real, whether it's a sketch or a fully formed machined product. At its core, the purpose of a prototype and prototyping in general is mitigating risk by expressing your idea or concept in a form that other people can give you feedback about it. So if you think of any time that you've ever waved over a colleague and asked them, hey, I just want to get your opinion on this. Can you share with me like what you think about it? In effect, you have a prototype and you've tested it. And the main purpose at the end of the day should be to go back and update and change whatever it is that you had created. If you just search the value of prototyping or the value of design, it's been proven that teams who embrace prototyping and human centered design tactics outperform other organizations in terms of efficiencies, revenue gain. My kind of interpretation of why that is, if you think about the beginning of a project compared to the end of the project, as you move along the timeline, the cost of changes to whatever you're working on increase dramatically compared to the opportunity to actually make the change. So in upfront planning and programmatic or schematic phases of anything that you're doing, you have lower emotional investment, you have lower financial investment, but a huge opportunity to be agile and flexible and change as you move into actual build and execution, regardless of a product or a digital product or a fully machined industrial design. The opportunity for changes decreases dramatically, and the cost of those changes increases dramatically. If we're doing that at the start of the project and really through the entire life cycle of the project, we can change and accommodate our designs to user needs in a much more flexible way, but also in a much more cost-effective way. The next section I want to talk to you guys about relates to different ways that companies have incorporated prototyping models into their ways of working. So the first example I'd like to share with you is from IDN, who was recently purchased by Capgemini, and they're a design agency who oftentimes approach their clients with a traditional design thinking model that is all about discovery, definition, and then refining what it is they want to build. And if you've ever seen any design thinking methodologies, you might be familiar with this double diamond at the front, where you see empathize, synthesize, create a design brief, and then you ideate and prototype and make something, and then you validate it, and then move it into a delivery cycle, in this case, agile development. The place that I disagree with this model is that they've reduced prototyping as a word just to a single instant. But in reality, there's prototyping going on all throughout this model, and it's definitely something to go explore and read about. They have a great book called Long Live Design Thinking, which is really, really interesting. I personally think that prototyping products creates both time and space to gain real insights about real users. And a great model that I would encourage you to go and explore, and they have a ton of great resources online, is IBM's enterprise design thinking approach. IBM went through a complete transformation of their organization and embrace design at a fundamental core of their organization with these three simple principles, which then also feed into practices and methodologies that their teammates employ. The first being focus on user outcomes, second, restless reinvention, and third, diverse and empowered team. These three principles, if any organization can truly embrace at their core, they will become an effective design organization and an effective business. Their enterprise design thinking handbook goes into ways of working, methodology, actual facilitation exercises, things that you can do in your daily life or in your business that can help you accelerate and move to the next level as a design leader. And the act of prototyping reveals what you can improve upon to create better products. And no model embraces this more and I think champions this more than Cisco. So Cisco, right? We think of a large enterprise. You don't really think of them as a design organization, but their team of designers follow this model and this approach that I really, really resonate with, where at the beginning of the discovery phase, you're transitioning from raw ideas and then determining what to go do next. And then you're sort of oscillating along this sine curve of making things and then validating with the users that ultimately is working towards driving an investment decision and a high fidelity prototype at the end that everybody can be very clear and know what it is that they're making. Working with Cisco was a joy, and I got to intimately kind of work within this model. And it's really great to look and at that sine wave as the act of prototyping. It's continuous. It never ends, but you move through different purposes. Sometimes you're prototyping just to make and get feedback from your colleagues, and other times you're prototyping with the purpose of validating your ideas with users. And I want to share with you the last model of building and testing a prototype in just 5 days using the Google Ventures design sprint model. This is a model that I worked on, was hired as a consultant to come in and facilitate along with other partners and help them prototype and learn to utilize these methods and these mindsets to move from an idea to a prototype in just 5 days. Great, fabulous framework, can really transform an organization, but it takes significant and personal investment from everybody involved to run it. But at the core of the design sprint is prototyping. Whenever you go from an idea to building and launching something and then learning about it, oftentimes the build phase can drag out over extended periods of time, which cause the launch and learnings to be oftentimes problematic. And in the design sprint, you're subverting the build and launch phase by prototyping something at a believable simulation of a product to learn about it and inform your ideas in a very quick feedback loop that can help you reduce costs and mitigate risk. So I know that was a lot. I'm going to have a list of resources at the end that you can check out, but I want to shift gears and ask you, what was the last time you made a prototype? Feel free to pause the video, take a second to write down just for the next couple of minutes and think about the last time that you made a prototype of something. So after the pause, I want to share with you the last time that I made a prototype. My last prototype was what I call Cat Fort. We had boxes laying around the apartment and a new kitten that needed exercise and something to play with. And our first prototype on the left was made from a furniture box that was much too large, bulky, took up way too much space in our living room. And then we started to iterate on it and transform it and make it more like a side table in our apartment that the cat could hang out in and have visibility. The simple act of just testing this out is helping identify what type of furniture we might need to get to accommodate this animal. Oftentimes you hear these terms of low, medium, and high fidelity. I don't think that low, medium, and high fidelity wireframing or mock-ups is enough to capture what the spirit and act of making a contemporary product really need. We have to think of new ways to discuss and talk about what we make with our colleagues who might be more business-minded or more tactical or less sort of creative and design-oriented. My interpretation of these different fidelities. Low fidelity is oftentimes representative of sketches or drafts. They don't use real words. Sometimes they use boxes, non-real imagery, and oftentimes they're more iterative and looking for internal exploration and creation of ideas. A storyboard is an example of a medium fidelity. Oftentimes in a design sprint, for example, when you're storyboarding, you'll use real words, real imagery, real thumbnail, things that you think are going to be in the prototype or in the product. Words matter at this point. If it includes real language, it's a medium fidelity prototype, whether it's a sketch or it's actually mocked up in a digital program. And finally, high fidelity prototypes you might be aware of, used to do user testing and to get feedback from stakeholders, or in the cases of physical product, you'll often see 3D printed mock-ups that truly represent the size and scale of the thing that's being made. So now the question is, what do prototypes prototype? When do you use a low fidelity prototype or a medium fidelity prototype and high fidelity? What are these things actually doing and helping you accomplish? Why are we prototyping? We know it's valuable. We know that it's a good thing to do to iterate and get feedback on our ideas. What is it that we're prototyping is a very, very important question to answer. And an article back from 1992 by some teammates at Apple, if you search this, what do prototypes prototype, you'll find their white paper. They summarize prototyping as prototyping three distinct things. A role prototype is used to investigate questions of what an artifact could do for a user, its value proposition. A look and feel prototype is built primarily to explore the concrete experience of an artifact. Think aesthetics, think qualities, sensibility. An implementation prototype is often built to answer technical questions and the ways an artifact might actually work. So example one shows this role prototype for a 3D space planning application. Example two is another look and feel prototype where they were testing these handles and being able to scale and size and position items. So they kind of moved to that next level of fidelity. And then example three is a working implementation prototype that the user can click and explore and actually test out this 3D space planning application. And Hood and Hill in What Do Prototypes Prototype run through several examples, I believe 15 examples in all, of different types of prototypes and what they were prototyping at Apple. Honestly, this article just proves to me that Apple design has been ahead for the past 30 years, and they will continue to be ahead. They are an amazingly progressive organization, but highly secretive. Example 9 here on the right, you can see a look and feel simulation of a child's toy using a ball or paper mache ball with an RC car inside of it that was used to move around a room. And then some other really cool examples that I love. This appearance model for what they call the integrated communicator back in 95. Example 8 is a fashion design workspace application for the Mac in 1992. And example 10 is a more of that industrial design example of a pizza box prototype of an architect's computer. If you read the article, you can go and learn more about each of these examples. They're really, really fascinating stories. But then there's actually a fourth type of prototype that I'd like to, and that's the integrated prototype or the integration prototype. These are built to represent the complete user experience of an artifact and what I believe are actually the most efficient artifacts to create as a designer and when you're exploring your ideas. The integrated prototype lies at the center of this What Do Prototypes prototype triangle. You're striking that perfect harmony between the role, the look and feel, and the implementation of the thing that you're working on. Stephanie Hood and Charles Hill in What Do Prototypes prototype cover these integrated prototypes as a really interesting and dynamic way of prototyping that can open up a whole world of possibilities whenever you're testing and getting feedback from your users. They do this because they balance and resolve constraints in different design dimensions, right? It's a multi-criteria prototype. They verify that a design in its entirety is complete and coherent, and they find synergy in the design by balancing the technical implementation, balancing the value proposition against the look and feel, and putting all of those things in conversation with each other. And we've all been in that case or situation where you test something that is really beautiful, sexy, you think people are going to love it, but then your engineers or your delivery team comes to you and says, hey, we can't build that. We got to go back to the drawing board. That's way too out there. The integrated prototype is what's helping you try to balance that. And what I think the integrated prototype is really getting at, it's not just about usability. It's not just about look and feel and sexiness and how cool your design is. And it's not just about technical implementation. Those things are always going to be in dialogue in a dialectic conversation. This integrated prototype approach helps us pursue desirability. We can truly find what the blend of those things can actually do for the user. And you've probably seen some example of this graph where we have this MVP triangle on the left. And oftentimes, whenever we're creating something, we just take the bottom slice or we take a slice of another part of it. But that's not really the way we need to go. We need to be taking these vertical slices through this triangle that balance every aspect of the product so that we can test about it while simultaneously really finding out what the user desires. Has your perception of prototypes changed at all? And if so, why? And if not, why? The question might come to mind is, well, when do I prototype? And when I do, when should I use a certain type of prototype? Elaborate or drawn out sets of tests are just a complete waste of resources. And uh, it's been proven that the best results often come from testing no more than 5 users and running as many small tests as you can at a time. And this is basically out of research from Nielsen Norman Group, which is a really fundamental user research firm that have an amazing set of knowledge that they've shared out publicly. What they did is they retroactively analyzed thousands of usability studies that they did. And when they plotted them, they found that there's diminishing returns on the percent of problems that you can find in a given test. After just 5 users, 80% of results in a test are found. So if you keep interviewing 25, 30 people, you're really doing 4 or 5 times the work for less than a quarter of the results you found. So if you listen to Nielsen Norman Group, your model should look something like this. You should spend some money or effort to take your ideas and learn about them, make another thing for some small amount of money or effort, and then go learn about it, right? And go into this more iterative cycle instead of investing a huge amount into a single idea. This way, if you spend your money or time in a more sort of focused and iterative way, you'll actually maximize your returns and maximize the return on your effort, which is important because you have to follow up to get it right. So if you're expecting to get it right on the first go, anytime you make something, you're going to fail. What this is saying is to make something, review the feedback, update it, and test it again. And what you'll notice is that the time to create this thing will reduce and your iterations will become tighter and more focused as you go. The importance of a narrative in a prototype can't be understated. So if you find yourself having to give somebody a long-winded introduction to whatever it is you're testing, then you really should make or refine your prototype more. We've all been there when somebody calls us over and they say, hey, I want to show you this thing I'm really excited about. Say, cool, show me. I'd love to see it. They say, well, imagine that you're doing this and that, and then all of a sudden you're going to go over here and then that, and then now you're looking at this thing. Well, I would argue that you haven't really effectively prototyped it if I have to be sort of convinced of what the thing is. Your introduction to a prototype should be quite straightforward. It should help give me context, help me give the feedback that you're actually looking for. And this idea comes from a term called in medias res, where you're dropped into the middle of a narrative without preamble. Somebody shows you something and they're looking for raw feedback. Movies oftentimes use this. Storytelling uses this. Traditionally, there's a beginning, middle, and end. In medias res, what you're doing is you're actually changing and manipulating the order of the story to elicit a better reaction from your viewers for your user. And personally, I firmly believe that this is something that we can leverage in prototypes and in the things we make. Whenever you're creating something, you should always be thinking about how somebody's going to use it. What's the story you're trying to tell with it? How I personally see this working, right? Like if we take everything we talked about and bring it together, whenever you're creating prototypes, you should make an integrated prototype. You should balance role, look and feel, and technical implementation into this thing that you're making. Whether you're prototyping a cat fort or you're prototyping a product and making a digital product or a physical thing, always try to be balancing those multiple criteria. And it's going to make your product better because you're thinking about it at the start. You're not leaving anything to the end. And you have to measure what you learn about. There's no point in asking somebody for feedback if you don't take notes and you're not intending to use those notes to make your thing better. You have to measure interviews. You have to measure what you learn. A great way to do that is through a scorecard and actually listing out the questions that you're going to ask and making sure that you measure the responses to them across a set of 5 people or 10 people, whatever kind of you feel comfortable with. What this can do is actually show you where you were successful and where you weren't. In some cases, if people understood it or if they would use it, if they wouldn't, did they use certain parts of it more than others? A scorecard can really help you measure and reflect on that after your test. So an example I want to share is if we take the Apple model and we think about doing 3 tests, and maybe we ran our tests with the purpose of viewing to focus more on look and feel, or we focus solely on role and value proposition, and then we focus on implementation. What this can do is this can help us actually plot and learn about our work over time, which oftentimes can be a winding path. Sometimes when you look back in hindsight about the design process, it's not a perfect sine wave. It's not a double diamond. It's much more organic and fluid, and oftentimes is a winding path to find something that's serendipitous and exciting and valuable to a user. In business, a lot of times we like to sort of make this imaginary point A, start of a design process, to the point B, the end of the design process. And I just want to encourage you to not fall for that fallacy. Advocating for good design is advocating for uncertainty, ambiguity, and exploration. And it's an adventure that we're all on constantly as creatives. So we talked about a lot. There's links that can be shared, and I'm happy to talk more about how I've used this as a design agency and also just as somebody who's built a lot of products, failed a whole lot. So from IDN to IBM, Cisco to the design sprint, um, by focusing on the purpose of the prototype that you're making, that is on what it prototypes, we and you can make better design decisions and save clients a ton of money, save yourself emotional heartbreak, and really just make really cool shit. I appreciate your time today. Had a really, really exciting time talking with you. If you want to get in touch, you can use my QR code here to look me up on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a message or get in touch. I'd be happy to talk to you more about prototyping. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I am excited to hear about your community. Hopefully one day participate.